Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
Sasha Banks and Bayley. Again, another story from Raw this week. It's been interesting as I've been watching. I am so hungry. I am fiending for a Sasha Banks heel turn. I just think that Sasha she's perfect as a heel. If you guys are familiar with her NXT stuff, and we used to talk about her NXT stuff all the time on the podcast years ago, but if you guys are familiar with the NXT stuff, you know she was great as a heel. Sasha's ratchet. No, she's not. It was awesome. It was a great time in the career of Sasha Banks, and that's, to me, where that character should be. I do see, especially this week, I was just kind of paying attention to the dynamic between Bayley and Sasha, and I kind of feel like the Sasha heel turn is a bit of a fake out, and that we are going to see a Bayley heel turn. That's what it feels like to me. It feels like we're going to see a Bayley heel turn. Now, I personally would rather see a Sasha Banks heel turn. And even though it's a little bit more predictable, I just think that Sasha Banks would do a better job. I think if Sasha Banks were a bad guy, it would give fans an opportunity to appreciate her as a bad guy. And when she eventually turned back to a good guy after this run, she would be a much, much, much bigger star. Whereas if Bayley's a bad guy and Sasha Banks is babyface, I don't know that will long-term benefit anybody, because I think Bayley is a natural good guy, and maybe that's just because I'm going back to where they were most successful in NXT, but I think that Sasha is working in the last several weeks on a whole nother level. But I think she's got I just think she'd benefit greatly from being a bad guy, and I'm worried that it's going to be Bayley who ends up in that spot. Now, the benefit to all this is that I absolutely see an implosion coming with those two. And I do think, and call me crazy, I know there's a limited amount of room on that WrestleMania card, and every year, like last year, the Intercontinental Championship was on the pre-show. It's a very limited amount of space, especially with the amount of specialty matches you're bound to have every year at WrestleMania. But based on the fact that where we are with the women's revolution, how much farther we are than we were 2 years ago, meaning now we're seeing a women's elimination chamber match. We saw the women's Royal Rumble close the Royal Rumble show. You've got genuine superstars. Let's be honest for a second. When I'm going over that list of Elias and Braun and Miz, I feel the exact same way about Asuka. You've got a women's division like you've never had before. I don't think it's that far-fetched to believe that this year at WrestleMania we will get 3 women's matches. We've had 2 before. I don't think it's so far-fetched to believe we'll get 3 and the Ronda Rousey match. I think if the WWE wants to be progressive, if the WWE wants to talk about the women's revolution, I think what would be amazing for WrestleMania, and again, it's controversial because it would end up with somebody missing a spot. There'd be male competitors that wouldn't get a spot because of this, but so be it. I think there'd be an interest, and I just think that the story has to be told right. You got 2 weeks till Elimination Chamber, but then after Elimination Chamber, I think you got 6 weeks until WrestleMania, and 6 weeks is plenty of time in 2018 to tell a story. In my mind, you go forward to WrestleMania, you've got Charlotte defending the SmackDown Women's title, maybe against Asuka, maybe against Becky, who knows. You've got Alexa Bliss defending the Raw Women's title, maybe against Asuka, maybe against Nia Jax. I hope that they don't do that triple threat thing with Nia, but, I would like to see something where maybe Alexa gets involved in the Nia Jax-Asuka match at the pay-per-view, and Asuka wins because she's got to win, and then she picks Charlotte because she never picked an opponent. So maybe you have Asuka versus Charlotte, Alexa Bliss versus Nia. You've got Ronda Rousey in some kind of mixed tag team thing with Stephanie McMahon that people have been talking about. And then, on top of all that, on top of the Ronda Rousey match, on top of the 2 women's title matches, I think it would be super cool and progressive and forward-thinking and exactly what the women's evolution needs. No titles, no nothing. A grudge match. Sasha Banks versus Bayley. Because imagine what a big deal that would be for WrestleMania. Sasha Banks versus Bayley. No title. No triple threat. No battle royal. You know what I mean? It's just these two women putting on an amazing match. And those two women have the ability to put on an unbelievable match. Go over to the first NXT TakeOver Brooklyn. NXT TakeOver Brooklyn 1. That was a show that featured Tyler Breeze versus Jushin Thunder Liger. That was a show that featured a ladder match between Kevin Owens and Finn Balor. And that was a show where the night got stolen by Sasha Banks versus Bayley. That's a match I want to see at WrestleMania. That's a match I want to see with no titles on the line. And that's a story. If you tell me the Sasha Banks-Bayley story, regardless of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, because you could go either way and tell an amazing story. If you put as much energy into that story as you did into the video on Monday, showing me Asuka by the numbers and explaining why she's such a major, major superstar, then that's one of my most highly anticipated matches of WrestleMania. And let those two bring it. I am right now putting it on the table. What I want to see at WrestleMania is no titles on the line. Grudge match. Sasha Banks versus Bayley. And I highly anticipated matches of WrestleMania. And that's what let those two bring. That's what would take us to a different place. That's what would take us to a different place. Lawrence saying, too easy. Put the U.S. and Raw Tag Team titles on the pre-show where they sadly belong at the moment. Plenty of room for the women matches. But I don't think, and Scott says Nia needs to win a belt. Well, Nia can beat Alexa at WrestleMania. You know, that could be a nice crowning thing for Nia, maybe. I wouldn't mind Alexa beating Nia either. Like, I think that match could go either way. But I just think that, and it has to be on the main show. Sasha versus Bayley. You know, they give them the opportunity to steal WrestleMania, and I'd be all on board.